It was exactly 8:45 in the morning. I was home alone. Being by myself on weekdays wasn't new to me, but something felt different about this particular morning. My dogs were unusually restless, pacing back and forth, looking toward the door. Their odd behavior made me uneasy. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. No one usually comes by at this hour, especially in the middle of the week. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was just a delivery. As I walked past the window toward the door, my dog started barking louder. I peeked through the small window beside the door and saw a man I didn't recognize standing there. Something about him seemed off. A strange, forced smile was plastered on his face. His presence sent a wave of dread through me. I'd heard plenty of stories about women being alone at home and ending up in dangerous situations, and those stories flooded my mind right then. I hesitated near the door, meeting his gaze, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't right. Through the crack in the door, I said, "No, I'm not opening the door." I made it clear with a firm no and closed the window, thinking he'd take the hint and leave. But he didn't. 5 minutes passed. I kept glancing at the clock, but the man was still standing there. My heart began to race. Who just stands outside someone's house like that? The longer he stayed, the more uncomfortable I became. It felt like something bad was about to happen. Gathering some courage, I cracked the window open again and asked, "What do you want?" The man smiled again, but this time it felt even more unsettling, more artificial. He said, "I'm from the house next door. They just moved in and are fixing it up to sell. They're out of water, so they sent me to ask if they could use your outdoor faucet." Alarm bells went off in my head. Why would someone send a stranger to ask for water? Why didn't the new neighbors come themselves? And I had never seen anyone moving into the house next door. The whole thing felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a setup. Was this some kind of trap? Letting a stranger near my home, especially when I was alone, seemed like a terrible idea. My gut told me, this isn't right, something's wrong. His eyes had this urgency, as if he knew I was getting suspicious. I said, "Sorry, you'll have to find water somewhere else." His tone shifted slightly, irritation creeping in. "I need to get this done. I need your water." There was an odd pressure in his voice. Every nerve in my body was on high alert. Without saying another word, I slammed the window shut and locked the door. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me, like he wasn't just a regular person, like something far darker was behind him. The dogs, too, had fallen eerily silent. The air in the house felt thick, like there was an unseen presence lurking around. Usually my dogs were never this quiet, but now they just stared at the door, not making a sound. Slowly I approached the window again, needing to see if he had left, but when I looked out, he was no longer on the porch. I felt a brief wave of relief. But then, the dogs started barking again, this time even more frantically. I spun around toward the back window, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There he was, standing in the backyard, staring at me. That same twisted smile was still plastered on his face, but this time it looked more sinister, more malicious. A shiver ran down my spine. I quickly pulled the curtain shut, but the air inside my home grew even heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house, that someone or something was here with me. A faint whisper echoed behind me. I whipped around, scanning the dim corner of the room. Standing in the shadows, barely visible, was a figure. My eyes struggled to focus as the room seemed to warp around me. Panic gripped me. The figure slowly began moving toward me, and the air turned icy cold. I could barely breathe. Suddenly, the dogs erupted into loud, frantic barking, as if sensing something terrifying was about to happen. The man was still out there, staring through the window, and the shadowy figure inside kept coming closer. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. An overwhelming sense of dread told me I might never get out of this house alive. Just then, the curtain by the window fluttered open slightly, and I locked eyes with him again. His smile was even more grotesque now, his face twisted into something nightmarish. My whole body was trembling, and the only thought racing through my mind was, how am I going to survive this? It felt like time had stopped. My throat was tight. No sound would come out. It was as if I had stepped into a nightmare that was now my reality. The man outside was still staring at me, while the shadow inside the house crept closer and closer. Unable to take it anymore, I screamed. Just then, the door handle started turning slowly, like someone was trying to break in. The door began to rattle more violently. Terror surged through me. I rushed to the door and grabbed the handle, holding it tightly to keep it from opening. Meanwhile, the dark figure moved closer. Shadows seemed to crawl out of the walls, reaching toward me. I could see distorted faces, twisted in agony, leering from every corner of the room. Long, shadowy arms stretched out from the walls, trying to grab me. The pounding on the door grew louder, and the man's voice outside morphed into a deep, menacing growl. "You can't escape me, I've come for you." Then, with a deafening crash, the window shattered. That eerie, twisted laughter filled the room, echoing around me. Everything went black as I lost consciousness. When I woke up, the house was dead silent. The man, the shadows, everything was gone, as if none of it had ever happened. But the air was still icy cold, and the door handle continued to rattle slightly. And in the back of my mind, that sinister laughter still echoed. I knew it wasn't over yet. The date was July 14th, 2017, a day forever etched into my memory because what happened is something I can never forget. At the time, I had been living alone in a small rental house for about a year. The house wasn't very large, but it was enough for just me. My lease was almost up, so I had started packing my things and cleaning the house in preparation for moving to a new place. I had no idea that a strange and terrifying experience was waiting for me that day. That morning, I had just finished cleaning the living room. I had packed away everything except the furniture, leaving the room feeling empty, as if no life had ever been there. I then moved on to the kitchen. It wasn't a large kitchen, but it had several cabinets, most of which I had barely used. Some of the cabinets, in fact, hadn't been opened in nearly a year. As I opened one of them, I spotted something odd inside. At first, it looked like an old shirt or some kind of cloth. Curious, I picked it up, realizing it wasn't mine. But as I moved the fabric aside, I noticed something else. A small, hidden lever, almost entirely concealed. What was this doing here? This didn't seem like a normal part of the kitchen. My curiosity intensified. I leaned in further to get a better look inside the cabinet. It was big enough that I had to crawl partway in to examine it. That's when I discovered a small trapdoor tucked away on one side of the cabinet. From the outside, you'd never be able to see it. A chilling feeling crept over me, but curiosity had a firm grip on me. I opened the door, revealing a narrow passage. The space was dark and damp, but I could clearly see food wrappers and old blankets lying inside. Someone had been living there. The realization sent a wave of cold terror through me. Instantly, I understood. Someone had been hiding in my house in this secret space. My body froze. I stood there for what felt like forever, processing the idea that someone had been living right under my nose. I knew I often spent long hours at work, but the thought that someone was this close, hidden, was absolutely horrifying. Who were they? How long had they been there? These questions consumed me as my terror grew. Summoning every bit of courage I had, I backed out of the space. All day long, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My mind kept circling around this discovery. On one hand, I was terrified that the person might still be in the house. On the other hand, I tried to reassure myself that whoever had been living there must have left long ago. The next day, after coming home from work, I felt compelled to check the trapdoor again. My fear was still there, but so was my curiosity. I knew I wouldn't find peace until I looked again. So, just like before, I opened the cabinet, crawled inside, and pulled the lever. The trapdoor creaked open, and what I saw left me paralyzed. This time I saw him. There was a man hiding inside. He immediately turned to look at me, and before I could react, he slammed the door shut in my face. I screamed in terror and bolted out of the kitchen, not stopping for a second. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I ran straight to my car and, with shaking hands, called the police. I didn't have the courage to wait in the house. My hands were trembling, but I managed to tell the police the whole story. They arrived a short time later. From a distance, I watched. too scared to return to the house. The police searched every inch of the place, but they didn't find anyone. The man had disappeared. The emptiness I felt was overwhelming. I knew deep down that whoever had been hiding there had fled, but the horrifying reality remained. Someone had been living in my house. How long had they been there? How had I never known? I never got the answers to these questions. I moved out of that house as fast as I could. Even though I've settled into a new place, the memory of that terrifying discovery still haunts me. At night, I sometimes feel like that man might be hiding nearby, watching me. I've installed more security measures in my new home, but the fear lingers. Every creak or noise in the dark makes me think that maybe, just maybe, someone is hiding in the shadows and watching me. It was a Saturday night like any other. At least that's how it seemed at first. But for me, this night quickly transformed into something extraordinarily unsettling, an experience that I would never forget. At 18 years old, I had decided to spend one last night in my childhood home before my family made the move to a new place. As I stood in the dimly lit living room, I was flooded with nostalgia, recalling countless memories that echoed within those walls. Yet, alongside that warmth came a heavy reluctance to leave behind the only home I had ever known. In my family, I was not alone. I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. However, they had all moved on, starting their own lives, leaving me to navigate the maze of memories we had created together. That particular evening, I found comfort in my favorite pastime, video games. I settled in front of a large flat-screen TV, indulging in a delicious feast of pizza and soda I had picked up from Tony's, the local pizzeria that always hit the spot. The stillness of the night wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, yet I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the walls of this old house harbored dark secrets waiting to be uncovered. Our home, built in the late 90s, had witnessed the laughter and tears of our family over the years. But it also held stories of the strange and inexplicable. My siblings often shared tales of unsettling occurrences they had experienced, inexplicable footsteps echoing through the hallway in the dead of night, hushed whispers floating through the air, and shadowy figures lurking in corners, seemingly biding their time. The basement in particular was a hotspot for these strange happenings, especially that corner room that everyone instinctively avoided. While we often laughed about it, a palpable tension filled the air whenever we discussed the things we believed lived in that dark, foreboding space. That night, feeling both anxious and excited, I locked all the doors tightly before heading to bed, convinced that my solitude would keep me safe. Around 11:30 p.m., I nestled under my blankets, feeling the comforting weight of sleep wash over me, letting the tranquility of the evening envelop me like a warm embrace. But then, in an instant, the unexpected shattered my peace, dragging me back into the waking world. Groggy and disoriented, I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. The bright red numbers glared back at me, 3 a.m. Then, just as if it were a scene from a horror movie, I heard it, a voice I recognized all too well, cutting through the silence of the night. "Ethan, wake up, you're going to be late for work." It was my mother's voice, unmistakable and echoing down the quiet hallway. Confusion enveloped me like a thick fog. My mother wasn't supposed to be home. She was miles away attending a family gathering. "Mom?" I mumbled, still trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. "Ethan, open the door. You'll be late." The voice was insistent, almost frantic, filled with a sense of urgency that sent chills racing down my spine. Panic surged through me as the terrifying truth hit me. I was all alone in this house and my mother was nowhere near. I backed away from the door, my heart racing, feeling a rush of dread coursing through my veins. "Mom," I whispered, glancing at the clock again, its red numbers confirming my worst fears. 3 a.m. and she was miles away. In that chilling moment of realization, a wave of fear washed over me, sending a shiver down my spine. The voice continued, still pleading, "Ethan, open the door." But something shifted. It no longer sounded like my mother. It felt like something far more sinister was trying to invade my sanctuary. In a frantic attempt to regain my composure, I grabbed my Bible from the nightstand, clutching it tightly as if it could protect me from whatever dark force was at play. "Be gone, evil spirit," I shouted, my voice trembling yet filled with a fierce determination. And just like that, as if my words had pierced through the darkness, the relentless knocking came to an abrupt halt. The silence that followed was deafening, almost oppressive in its weight. I stood frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as I tried to process what had just happened. As dawn broke, sunlight crept through the curtains, casting warm rays across my room and slowly dispelling the lingering shadows that had haunted me throughout the night. With a newfound sense of resolve, I made my way downstairs, my mind still racing, and found my mother in the kitchen completely unaware of the terror I had just faced. "Mom," I asked, my voice shaky, "why did you come back to the house last night?" She looked at me, confusion etched across her face. "I didn't come back, Ethan. I've been home the entire time." Her words sent a chill down my spine, and the reality of the previous night's events began to sink in. What had I just experienced? The terror I had felt wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was something real, something inexplicable that had crossed the threshold between my world and the unknown. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had brushed against a dark presence, something lurking just beyond the veil of reality, waiting for the right moment to strike. That night would forever be etched in my memory, a haunting reminder that some forces remain unseen, lurking in the shadows, waiting for moments of vulnerability to make their presence known. I often find myself wondering if anyone else has encountered something like this, those fleeting moments when the boundary between reality and the supernatural blurs, leaving us to question everything we hold dear and believe to be true.